The year was 2247, and Lieutenant Kim Do-hoon was bored. He sat alone in the dark monitoring room of the deep-sea station Haishan, watching green lines move across his sonar screen. The station floated above the Pacific Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. His job was simple. Watch the screen, report anything strange, go to sleep, wake up, do it again. For 3 years, nothing strange had happened. The ocean floor was quiet, dark, dead, until tonight. Do-hoon was drinking his 4th cup of coffee when the screen flickered. A small pulse appeared at the bottom, far below where anything should exist. He leaned forward and adjusted his headphones. A sound came through, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of metal. He checked his equipment. Everything was working fine. The sound was real. Do-hoon pressed the communication button. "Commander Park, please come to the monitoring room. I have something unusual." Commander Park Yuna arrived 5 minutes later. She was a tall woman with short black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded Haitian for 2 years and had never received a report like this. "Show me," she said. Do-hoon played the recording. The metallic heartbeat filled the room. Yuna's face remained calm, but her hands gripped the edge of the console. "Depth?" she asked. 11,000 meters, Commander, right at the trench floor." "That's impossible. Nothing survives down there. No machines, no life, nothing." "I know, Commander, but the signal is real. It's been pulsing for the last 20 minutes. Steady, consistent, like something is alive down there and wants us to know." Yuna made her decision quickly. She ordered the deployment of an unmanned probe, a small robot with cameras and lights designed to explore the deepest parts of the ocean. The probe took 6 hours to reach the bottom. When its cameras activated, no one in the control room spoke. The probe's lights cut through the darkness of the trench floor. Sediment floated in the water like snow. And there, half buried in the ancient mud, sat something that should not exist. A spacecraft. It was enormous, perhaps 400 meters long, shaped like a curved blade lying on its side. The hull was made of a metal so dark it seemed to swallow the probe's lights rather than reflect them. Strange patterns covered every surface, geometric shapes that flowed into each other like a language written in mathematics. "That's not ours," whispered Do-hoon. "That's not human." Yuna's heart was pounding, but her voice remained steady. "Get me a secure line to Earth Naval Command. Priority 1. Admiral Choi needs to see this immediately." The next 12 hours were chaos contained within strict military protocol. Admiral Choi Tae-woo, commander of the Pacific Fleet, watched the probe footage 17 times. He consulted with scientists, intelligence officers, and 3 different heads of state. Every expert agreed on 2 facts. First, the spacecraft was not made by any nation on Earth. Its design, its materials, its very existence was beyond human technology. Second, it had been down there for a very long time. Initial analysis of the sediment buildup suggested thousands of years, perhaps longer. Admiral Choi made the only decision he could make. He authorized Operation Ascent, a classified mission to raise the spacecraft from the ocean floor and transport it to a secure facility for study. "We found proof that we are not alone in this universe," he told Commander Yuna in their private communication. "Now we need to understand what this means before the rest of the world finds out, before panic spreads, before our enemies try to take it for themselves." Yuna understood. She had spent her entire career preparing for challenges, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this. She was a Navy officer, skilled in combat, logistics, and leadership. Now she was being asked to help uncover the greatest mystery in human history. The salvage fleet arrived 3 days later. The Cheongryong was the largest ship in the fleet, a massive vessel equipped with gravitational lift cables originally designed for mining asteroids in space. Now those cables would reach down into the darkness of the ocean and pull an alien spacecraft into the light. Do-hun was transferred to the Cheongryong as the primary sonar operator. He would guide the cables to the spacecraft. He would be the first to touch the unknown. The night before the lift began, Do-hun stood on the deck of the Cheongryong, staring at the dark water below. Somewhere down there, 11 kilometers beneath his feet, something waited. Something old. Something not human. He thought about his grandmother, who had told him stories when he was a child. Stories about spirits in the mountains, dragons in the sea, visitors from the stars. He had laughed at those stories then. He was not laughing now. Commander Yuna found him there, standing alone in the darkness. "Scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive." She stood beside him, looking at the same dark water. "I've been thinking about what happens next. We raise this thing, we study it, and then what? What do we find inside? Answers? Technology? Bodies? What if we find something that changes everything?" Do-hun asked. "What if we learn that everything we believed about ourselves, about our place in the universe, was wrong?" Yuna was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "Then we adapt. That's what humans do. We face the unknown. We learn. We survive. We've been doing it since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there." She turned to him, and in the dim light, he could see a small smile on her face. "Now we're going to find out." The next morning, as the sun rose over the Pacific, the Cheongryong lowered its cables into the abyss. 11 kilometers below, the ancient spacecraft waited in the darkness. Humanity was reaching down to touch the unknown, and the unknown was about to reach back. Part 2. Raising the Unknown. The lift took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cables groaning under impossible weight. 3 weeks of storms, equipment failures, and sleepless nights. 3 weeks of wondering if the ocean would give up its secret or swallow them all instead. Chief Engineer Han Mira had worked on asteroid mining operations for 15 years. She had moved rocks the size of mountains through the emptiness of space. But this was different. This was something her equipment was never designed to touch. The spacecraft resisted them at every step. On the first day, the cables made contact with the hull. Mira watched the sensor readings on her screen and frowned. The metal was not behaving like metal should behave. It did not conduct heat. It did not carry electrical current. When pressure was applied, it seemed to push back, as if the ship itself did not want to be moved. "Increase the lift power by 20%, she ordered. The cables strained. The ship remained still. 40%. Still nothing. "What is this thing made of?" muttered Petty Officer Baek Jun-ho, who was assisting with the operation. Mira did not answer. She did not have an answer. She had studied every known material in human science. This was none of them. This was something new. Something that should not exist. On the 7th day, the strange things began. Jun-ho was the first to report it. He was working a night shift, monitoring the cable tensions, when he saw something that made him freeze. The symbols on the spacecraft's hull, visible through the probe cameras, had moved. He was certain of it. He had memorized their positions during the first days of the operation. Now they were different, rearranged, changed. He reported it to Commander Yuna, who watched the footage with him. "Are you sure?" she asked. "The cameras could be distorted. The water pressure does strange things to electronics." "I'm sure, Commander." The symbols moved. When no one was looking directly at them, they changed. Yuna did not dismiss him. She had learned to trust the instincts of her crew. She ordered round-the-clock observation of the hull, with multiple cameras recording from different angles. The symbols never moved while being watched, but every morning they were in different positions. On the 12th day, the whispers started. Crew members began reporting sounds in the empty corridors of the Cheongryong. voices speaking in languages that no one recognized. Sometimes it sounded like singing, sometimes it sounded like warnings. One sailor swore he heard his dead mother calling his name. Mira ran every diagnostic she could think of. The ship's communication systems were clean. There were no radio signals, no electronic interference, nothing that could explain the sounds. Yet the whispers continued. "It's the spacecraft," Do-hoon said, during a late-night meeting with the senior officers. "It's doing something to us. Reaching out somehow. Maybe it's been alone down there for so long that it's trying to communicate." "Or warn us away," said Junho. Commander Yuna listened to them both. She understood their fear. She felt it herself, a cold weight in her stomach that never went away. But she also understood their mission. "We continue," she said. "Whatever this thing is, whatever it's doing, we need to understand it. And we can't understand it while it's sitting at the bottom of the ocean. We bring it up, we study it, we learn." The final week of the lift was the hardest. A massive storm rolled across the Pacific, waves 20 meters high crashing against the Cheongryong. The cables screamed under the stress. 2 of them snapped, and Mira had to perform emergency repairs while the ship rocked violently in the wind. But through it all, the spacecraft rose, slowly, meter by meter, hour by hour. It climbed from the darkness of the trench toward the light of the surface. 11 kilometers. 10. 9. The water pressure decreased. The temperature changed. And still the spacecraft rose. Mira touched the main viewing screen, watching the dark shape ascend through the water. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like a weapon carved from shadow. She realized she had not slept in 3 days, but she could not look away. "It's almost here," she whispered. On the final morning, the sea was calm. The storm had passed. The sun rose red and gold over the eastern horizon, painting the water with fire. And then the spacecraft broke the surface. Water poured off its dark hull in great cascading sheets, catching the sunlight like tears. The geometric patterns on its surface seemed to glow for just a moment, a brief flash of light that might have been a reflection, or might have been something else entirely. The entire crew of the Cheongryong gathered on deck to watch. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stared at the impossible thing floating before them, this artifact from another world, this proof that humanity had never been alone. Commander Yuna stood at the front of the crowd. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind her, she heard Junho crying quietly. She heard Do-hoon praying in a whisper. She heard Mira laughing, a strange sound of wonder and terror mixed together. "We did it," Yuna said, her voice barely audible. "We actually did it." The spacecraft was loaded onto a massive transport ship and covered with tarps to hide it from satellite observation. Its destination was a classified research facility on Jeju Island, designated Site Baekdu. There, the greatest minds in human science would study it. There, humanity would learn what secrets it held. As the transport ship sailed away, Yuna remained on the deck of the Cheongryong, watching it disappear over the horizon. She had raised an alien spacecraft from the ocean floor. She had accomplished something no human in history had ever done. But she could not shake the feeling that the real challenge was only beginning. They had brought the spacecraft to the surface. Now they had to find a way inside, and she had no idea what they would find when they did. The spacecraft sat in the center of Site Baekdu like a sleeping giant. The research facility had been built in secret, hidden inside a mountain on Jeju Island. Its walls were thick enough to block any signal from getting in or out. Its guards were trained to kill anyone who tried to learn what was inside. And inside, the investigation team was failing. For 4 days, they tried everything. Laser cutters burned out without leaving a mark on the hull. Diamond drills shattered against the dark metal. Explosives did nothing but make noise. The spacecraft seemed to absorb every attempt to breach it, turning human technology into useless toys. Chief Engineer Mira worked 20 hours a day, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her mind racing with theories that led nowhere. She had never encountered a material like this. It was not just strong. It was something beyond strength. It did not resist damage. It simply refused to acknowledge that damage was possible. "It's like the ship exists by different rules," she told Commander Yuna during one of their late-night meetings. "Our physics says that cutting something with enough energy will break it apart. This metal doesn't follow that rule. It doesn't even seem to know that rule exists." Commander Yuna listened patiently. She had been placed in charge of the investigation team by Admiral Choi, given full authority to make decisions. But authority meant nothing if she could not get inside the spacecraft. The third member of their core team was Dr. Shin Yunji, a xenolinguist brought in to study the symbols on the hull. She was a quiet woman with gentle eyes and a brilliant mind, fluent in 17 human languages and skilled at finding patterns in seemingly random data. She had spent her entire career preparing for a moment that everyone said would never come. Now that moment was here, and she was just as lost as the others. "The symbols are definitely a language," she reported. "They follow patterns that suggest grammar, syntax, meaning. But I cannot find a starting point. There is no key, no reference point, nothing that connects their language to ours." On the 5th day, Yunji made a discovery that changed everything. She was sitting alone in front of the spacecraft, studying a section of hull covered in particularly dense patterns. She had been staring at it for hours, letting her mind drift, not really thinking about anything specific. That was when she noticed the pulsing. It was faint, barely visible. A soft glow that moved through the geometric patterns like blood through veins. The pulsing had a rhythm to it, slow and steady, almost like breathing. Yunji leaned closer. The pulsing grew slightly brighter. She leaned back. The pulsing dimmed. Her heart began to race. She called for Yuna and Mira to join her. Together, they ran a series of experiments, approaching and retreating from the hull, bringing different people close to different sections. The results were consistent. The spacecraft responded to biological presence. It knew when living beings were near. It reacted to them. It was aware. "It's not a dead machine," Yunji said, her voice shaking with excitement. "It's been waiting for someone to approach it the right way." "What is the right way?" Yuna asked. Yunji did not know, but she had an idea. She studied the patterns around what appeared to be a seam in the hull, a thin line that might have been a door. The symbols there were different from the others, arranged in a circular formation that reminded her of a lock or an invitation. She took a deep breath. Then she walked forward and placed her palm against the circle. The hull split open. There was no sound, no grinding of gears, no hiss of pressure releasing. The dark metal simply flowed apart like water, revealing a corridor beyond. Cool air drifted out, carrying a scent that was strange but not unpleasant, like rain on alien flowers. Yunji stepped back, staring at the opening she had created. "It accepted me," she whispered. "It let me in." The investigation team entered in full protective suits, carrying lights, cameras, and sensors. The interior of the spacecraft was vast, designed for beings larger than humans. The ceiling stretched 4 meters high. The proportions suggested occupants standing over 2 meters tall, with long limbs and wide strides. Everything was dark, but their lights revealed walls covered in more of the geometric symbols. The patterns here were even more complex, flowing together in ways that suggested stories, histories, perhaps instructions. They found 3 chambers during their first exploration. The first was a navigation room. Holographic displays floated in the air, frozen in place, showing star maps of impossible detail. Mira interfaced her equipment with what looked like a control console. The maps flickered to life, zooming through galaxies and nebulae until they focused on a single point: Earth. It was marked with a symbol that Yoonji recognized from her studies of the hull patterns. She checked her notes 3 times before she trusted herself to speak. "That symbol," she said slowly. "I've seen it repeated throughout the ship. I thought it meant target or destination, but now I think it means something else." "What?" Yuna asked. "Origin. Or maybe return." The second chamber was worse. 12 pod-like structures lined the walls, similar to the stasis pods used on human long-range spacecraft, but larger and more advanced. 11 of them were broken, their glass surfaces shattered from the inside. Whatever had been sleeping in them was gone. But the 12th pod was intact. Through its clouded glass, they could see a figure. Humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. But the skin was pale gray. The closed eyes were too large for a human face, and the hands had 6 fingers instead of 5. "There's something in there," Junho said, his voice tight with fear. "Something alive." Mira checked the readings on her equipment. "The pod is still functioning. Some kind of suspended animation. Whatever this is, it's been sleeping for thousands of years." They left the stasis chamber and moved to the 3rd room. This was the archive. Every wall was covered in dense script, thousands of symbols accompanied by images. Yoonji began recording everything, her hands trembling as she pointed her camera at each section. Most of the images showed alien worlds, strange landscapes under foreign stars. Some showed the beings who built this ship, tall and slender figures with gray skin and large dark eyes, working together on projects too vast to understand. But one image made Yoonji stop completely. It showed Earth. Not the Earth of today, but an ancient Earth, covered in primitive oceans under a young sun. Surrounding it were dozens of spacecraft, identical to the one they stood in now, and beneath the image was a single word, repeated over and over. Yoonji translated it with shaking hands. "Seeded," she said. "They seeded us. They came here thousands of years ago, and they seeded life on our planet." She looked at Yuna, her face pale. "We didn't evolve on our own. We were planted. We were an experiment." And in the stasis chamber, as if responding to her words, the 12th pod began to glow. Security Officer No Sunwoo saw it first. He was standing guard near the stasis chamber, rifle ready, when the glow from the 12th pod grew brighter. He watched through the glass as the gray figure inside began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing strength. The glass slid away without a sound. The being sat up. Sunwoo raised his weapon. His training screamed at him to fire, to eliminate the threat before it could act. But something in those enormous dark eyes stopped him. They were not hostile. They were curious. And beneath the curiosity, he saw something he had not expected. Fear. Commander Yuna arrived seconds later, followed by Yoonji and Mira. She assessed the situation instantly and made her decision. "Lower your weapon," she ordered Sunwoo. "Commander, it could be dangerous. If it wanted to hurt us, it would have done so already. Lower your weapon, now." Sunwoo obeyed, though his hands remained tense. The being stepped out of the pod. It was tall, over 2 meters, with thin limbs and movements that seemed too smooth, too graceful for something so large. It looked at each of them in turn, those dark eyes studying them like a scientist examining specimens. Then it looked at Yoonji's tablet, which still displayed the translation of the word seeded. It reached out one long finger, 6 joints bending in ways human fingers could not, and touched the screen. New symbols appeared, correcting Yoonji's translation. "Not seeded," Yoonji said, reading the corrections. "The word has another meaning. More like cultivated, grown. They grew us." Over the following days, a halting communication developed between the humans and the being. Yunji worked constantly, building a bridge of language between two species that had never met. The being was patient, correcting her mistakes gently, teaching her new words and new concepts. Slowly, understanding grew. The being's name could not be pronounced by human mouths. The closest translation was something like Observer Kale, though it made clear these were approximations, not true names. Its species called themselves the Watchers, and they were older than humanity could imagine. Billions of years ago, when the universe was young and stars were still forming, the Watchers had spread across the galaxy. They had found life rare, fragile, precious, so they decided to help it grow. They developed genetic catalysts, complex molecules that could be introduced into primordial oceans to encourage the development of complex life. They visited thousands of worlds, planting the seeds of evolution on planets that showed promise. Earth was one of those worlds. "We planted the first sparks," Kale explained through the translation system they had developed. "Tiny changes in your ocean chemistry that encouraged cells to grow, to divide, to evolve. We did not create you directly. We simply gave your world a push, then waited to see what would grow." "And what did you expect to grow?" Yuna asked. Kale was silent for a moment. When it spoke again, there was something heavy in its voice. Something calm, something stable. Something that would grow slowly over millions of years, developing technology gradually, reaching the stars in peaceful harmony with other species. The large eyes blinked. "We did not expect you." Humanity, Kale explained, was an anomaly. Every other species the Watchers had cultivated followed the same pattern, millions of years of slow evolution. Gradual development of intelligence. Careful, measured progress toward technology and space travel. Humans had done everything wrong. They evolved too fast, reaching intelligence in a fraction of the expected time. They developed technology at a terrifying pace, going from stone tools to spacecraft in mere thousands of years while other species took millions. And their nature was different, more aggressive, more competitive, more unpredictable. "Your species fights constantly," Kyle said. "You compete with each other, you destroy and rebuild, you change so quickly that we cannot predict what you will do next. Every simulation we ran, every model we created, failed to predict the path you would take." "Is that why you were watching us?" Yunji asked. "Yes. The Watchers sent observer ships to monitor humanity's progress. My ship was one of them. We have been watching your world for thousands of years, trying to understand what you are, what you will become." Kyle explained that the ship had crashed 12,000 years ago during a routine observation mission. A system failure sent it plunging into the ocean. The crew escaped in smaller vessels, leaving only Kale behind in stasis, waiting for rescue that never came. Now Kale had a warning. "The Watchers are returning," it said. "Not to observe, not to study, to judge." The Watcher leadership had debated humanity's fate for centuries. Some argued that humans should be left alone, allowed to develop on their own path. But others saw the danger. A species this fast, this aggressive, this unpredictable could not be controlled. If humanity spread beyond Earth, if they reached other worlds and other species, they could upset the careful balance the Watchers had maintained for billions of years. They could destroy the peace of the galaxy. The decision had been made. "A fleet is coming," Kale said. "Hundreds of ships, far more powerful than this one. They will arrive in 3 of your years, and they are coming to end the experiment." The room was silent. "End it how?" Yuna finally asked, though she already knew the answer. "Your species will be prevented from spreading beyond this world. Your civilization will be reduced to a level that is no longer a threat. Your technology will be destroyed. Many of your people will die." Kyle's voice held no emotion, only the weight of fact. "This is what my people have decided. I am sorry." Yuna stood very still. She thought about everything she had learned. About the Watchers who had planted life on Earth billions of years ago, about humanity's unexpected evolution, about the fleet coming to destroy everything her species had built. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked. "Why warn us? Why not just let it happen?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Those enormous eyes studied her face, searching for something. "Because I have watched your species for 12,000 years, it finally said. "Even in stasis, I dreamed. I saw your wars and your kindness, your destruction and your creation, your hate and your love. You are not what we expected. You are chaos and contradiction. You are everything the Watchers fear." Kale leaned forward, and for the first time, something like emotion entered its voice. "But you are also something else, something I do not have a word for. Something that makes me think the Watchers might be wrong." "And what is that?" Yuna asked. Kyle considered the question. "Hope," it said. "Against all odds, against all logic, you hope. And you fight for that hope. I want to see what happens when you fight for it now." The next morning, Admiral Choi arrived at Site Baekdu. Behind closed doors, Commander Yuna told him everything. Humanity had 3 years to prepare for extinction. The question was whether 3 years would be enough. Every television, every phone, every computer screen on Earth displayed the same message at the same time. Admiral Choi stood before the cameras, his face tired but determined, and told humanity that they were not alone, that they had never been alone, and that something was coming to end them. The chaos lasted 6 months. Nations accused each other of lies. Riots erupted in major cities. Governments fell. Religious movements rose and collapsed overnight. Millions of people refused to believe what they had been told. Millions more fell into despair, convinced that nothing could save them. But slowly, painfully, humanity began to come together. It started with scientists. Researchers from every country gathered at Site Baekdu to study the crashed spacecraft. Chief Engineer Mira led the team, working day and night to understand the alien technology. The hull material, the energy systems, the navigation equipment, everything was beyond human science, but not beyond human understanding. "They built for patience," Mira reported to the unified council that now governed Earth's defense. "Their ships are designed to last millions of years, to travel slowly across the galaxy, to observe without being seen. They are strong, yes, incredibly strong, but they are not built for war." Commander Yuna, now promoted to Admiral after Choi's retirement, listened carefully. "And our ships?" she asked. "Our ships are different. We build fast, we build aggressive, we build to fight. Human technology is less advanced, but it is more adaptable, more dangerous." Mira pulled up designs on her screen. "If we combine what we know with what we can learn from their ship, we can create something new, something they will not expect." The work began. Factories around the world converted to military production. Scientists who had spent their careers competing now worked together. Old conflicts were set aside. There was no time for hatred when extinction was 3 years away. Dr. Yunji continued her communication with Kale, learning everything the Watcher would share about its people, their weaknesses, their assumptions, their blind spots. "They have never fought a war," Kyle explained. "Not in the way you understand war. They have ended experiments before, but always against species that could not resist. Species that accepted their fate or did not understand what was happening. They have never faced an opponent that fights back." "Then they don't know what they're dealing with," Yunji said. "No," Kyle agreed. "They do not." Kyle was given a choice. It could return to stasis and wait for the fleet, returning to its people when they arrived. Or it could help humanity prepare, betraying everything it had ever known. The decision took 3 days. "Your species was not supposed to be this way," Kale finally said. You were meant to be calm, predictable, safe. Instead, you are chaos. You are violence. You are everything that terrifies my people." Admiral Yuna waited. "But you are also something else," Kale continued. "You create beauty from suffering. You find hope in darkness. You love with a fire that we have never understood." Those enormous eyes met hers. "I have watched you for 12,000 years. I have seen the worst of what you are, but I have also seen the best, and I believe the best deserves a chance to survive." Kyle stood. "I will help you." The next 3 years were the hardest in human history. Every resource was dedicated to the war effort. The Earth Defense Fleet grew from nothing to hundreds of ships, each one a hybrid of human aggression and Watcher durability. Weapons were developed that the galaxy had never seen. Soldiers were trained for combat in space. Admiral Yuna led from the front, driving herself and her people to the limits of endurance. She slept 4 hours a night. She made decisions that cost lives and saved others. She became the symbol of humanity's defiance, her face appearing on screens and posters across the world. But she never forgot what they were fighting for. "We're not just fighting to survive," she told her officers during one of their final briefings. "We're fighting for the right to exist on our own terms. The Watchers created us. They planted us. They think they own us. We're going to prove them wrong." The fleet arrived on schedule. They emerged from hyperspace on a spring morning, hundreds of Watcher vessels appearing in orbit around Earth like dark clouds gathering before a storm. They were beautiful in a terrible way, graceful curves and geometric patterns. Ancient ships designed for a species that had never known war. They expected to find a primitive civilization waiting to be judged. Instead, they found the Earth Defense Fleet. 300 human ships rose from the planet's surface, engines burning bright against the darkness of space. At their head was the flagship Indomitable, commanded by Admiral Park Yuna herself. The Watchers broadcast a message, their first communication with humanity. They demanded surrender. They promised mercy if humanity would accept judgment peacefully. They spoke of the greater good, of galactic stability, of the danger that humanity represented. Yuna's response was broadcast on every frequency. "We are not your experiment," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We are not your children. We are not your mistake to correct. We are humanity. We climbed out of your ocean and built civilizations. We reached for the stars and touched them. We face our own destruction and we do not kneel." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You planted seeds in our world. You expected flowers. Instead, you grew something else, something that bites, something that fights, something that will never stop fighting as long as a single one of us draws breath." On the bridge of the Indomitable, surrounded by her crew, Yuna gave the order. "All ships, this is Admiral Park. You know what's at stake. You know what we're fighting for. Today, we show the universe what happens when you threaten humanity." She took a breath. "Attack!" The Earth Defense Fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, engines screaming, 300 ships crewed by the sons and daughters of every nation on Earth. United for the first and perhaps the last time in history. The Watcher fleet moved to intercept, their ancient weapons powering up, their commanders struggling to understand what was happening. This was not how it was supposed to go. This was not how any species had ever responded. But humanity had never been like other species. In the chaos of battle, explosions lighting the darkness of space, ships dying on both sides, something remarkable happened. The Watchers began to lose. Their ships were stronger, their technology more advanced. But they had never fought. They did not know how to adapt, how to improvise, how to sacrifice. They followed patterns and protocols while humans threw away the rulebook and invented new tactics in the heat of combat. A Watcher dreadnought fell to a coordinated attack by 12 human destroyers. A carrier was destroyed by a single pilot who flew his damaged ship into its engine core. The Watcher fleet, so confident in its superiority, began to break apart. Kyle watched from the surface of Earth, sensors tracking the battle above. There were tears in those enormous eyes, though whether they were tears of grief for its own people or joy for humanity's triumph, it could not say. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Watcher fleet was in retreat. Not destroyed, not conquered, but beaten back, wounded, uncertain, and humanity still stood. Admiral Yuna returned to Earth a hero. The world celebrated, not just because they had survived, but because they had proven something. They were not an experiment. They were not a mistake. They were humanity. In the aftermath, as the planet began to rebuild and prepare for whatever would come next, Yuna found time to speak with Kyle one last time. "Your people will return," she said. "This isn't over." "No," Kyle agreed. "It is not over, but it is different now. They expected to end an experiment. Instead, they found an enemy. They will need time to understand what that means, time to decide what to do next." "And what will you do?" Kyle considered the question. It had betrayed its own species. It had helped humanity fight back. It could never return to what it had been. "I will stay," it finally said. "I will watch. I will learn. Your species has taught me something I never expected to understand." "What's that?" "That being unpredictable is not a flaw. That chaos can be strength. That hope, even irrational hope, can change the universe." Kale's eyes met hers. "The Watchers have existed for billions of years. We have seen everything. We thought we knew everything, but we never met anything like you." Yuna smiled, tired but unbowed. "And now you have." The war for Earth's survival had ended, but humanity's story was just beginning. Somewhere out among the stars, the Watchers regrouped and wondered what they had unleashed. They had planted seeds on thousands of worlds, hoping to grow peaceful, predictable life. On Earth, they had grown something else entirely. They had grown monsters, warriors, dreamers. They had grown humanity, and humanity did not kneel.